The first thing I noticed when I walked into the engagement party was the sound of my heels against the marble floor, because every conversation stopped after the third step. Not immediately, just slowly enough for people to realize who I was before pretending they hadn't been staring. Her friends looked confused first, then uncomfortable, then curious. Emma had told everyone I was still figuring my life out, which was apparently the polished version of calling me a failure over overpriced cocktails every Thursday night for the last 8 months. I knew because one of her friends accidentally sent me the screenshots after too much champagne in February. She still uses spreadsheets like they're a personality trait, Emma had written at 1:14 a.m. The same week I was finalizing a debt acquisition contract connected to her father's property portfolio. By the time I reached the center of the ballroom, her fiancé had stopped smiling entirely. Emma looked beautiful in white silk, confident, untouchable, until she saw the cream-colored legal envelope in my hand and recognized the address printed across the top. Her family home, the one her father swore would never leave their name again. 8 months earlier, I was sitting inside a freezing conference room on the 32nd floor of Halbrecht Financial, while Emma texted me that she'd be about 40 minutes late to dinner again. The waiter refilled my water twice before I finally opened Instagram and saw why. Her friend Vanessa had posted a photo from a rooftop bar downtown, all of them holding martinis under the caption, "Celebrating people who actually made it before 30. Emma was in the middle, smiling directly at the camera. My phone buzzed 30 seconds later. "Dad thinks you should consider something more stable," she wrote. Not hello. Not sorry. Just that. At the time, my consulting business was surviving on contract work, late invoices, and 4 hours of sleep. I remember checking my bank app that night and seeing $428.16 in my account. While wearing a blazer with a ripped lining, I kept hiding under my arm. Emma came from old Connecticut money that liked pretending it was modest. Country club memberships, family attorneys, vacation homes listed under LLCs. And somewhere along the way, she stopped introducing me as her partner and started introducing me as someone working on a startup situation. I should have noticed the shift sooner. But humiliation usually arrives quietly first. 3 weeks after the rooftop photo, Emma invited me to her parents' house in Westport for what she called a practical conversation, which should have warned me immediately because wealthy people only use calm language when they're about to corner someone politely. Her mother opened the door wearing cream cashmere, and the same sympathetic expression people use at funerals. The dining room table was already set with folders before I even sat down. Tax statements, property assessments, refinance paperwork. Emma's father, Richard, explained everything like he was doing me a favor. Their family had leveraged the house 2 years earlier to expand a hospitality investment that collapsed after a lawsuit involving one of their hotel partners in Miami. The mortgage was underwater. Multiple payments were overdue. The bank was threatening foreclosure if they couldn't restructure within 90 days. I remember staring at the Blue Chase portfolio folder while Emma squeezed my wrist under the table like we were still a team. Richard kept talking about temporary liquidity problems, but the numbers told a different story. Nearly $2.8 million owed against a property now valued far below that after the market softened. Then Emma slid a paper toward me. "It's just a release acknowledgement connected to the consulting entity we discussed," she said casually. The consulting entity was mine, a small logistics advisory LLC I'd built during the previous 2 years. Richard wanted to use my company as part of a refinancing narrative because one of my transportation software projections had recently attracted investor attention. At the time, I thought they were asking for credibility. Later, I realized they were asking for insulation. I didn't sign that night. Emma barely spoke to me on the drive home afterward. She stared out the passenger window while rain streaked across the glass and finally said, "You always make everything harder than it needs to be." 2 days later, she ended things over coffee at a place in Tribeca, where we used to spend Sunday mornings pretending our lives weren't already drifting apart. She arrived 14 minutes late wearing sunglasses indoors. I still remember the timestamp because I checked it when she said, "I think we want different futures." That sentence would have hurt less if she hadn't spent the next 20 minutes explaining how exhausting it was to constantly defend my ambition to her friends and family. "People worry about you," she said carefully. "They think you're stuck. Stuck. I nodded like I understood, even while my chest felt hollow. Then she mentioned a man named Daniel for the first time. I've been spending time with someone who's more aligned with where I'm headed. More aligned. Corporate language for emotionally replacing someone before officially leaving them. I walked home in freezing rain carrying a laptop bag with unpaid invoices inside it. That night, I opened my email at 1:07 a.m. and found a DocuSign reminder from Richard's attorney requesting my signature on the consulting release form again. Something about the wording bothered me this time. Buried in the final pages was a clause referencing liability transfer protections tied to secondary collateral exposure. Secondary collateral. The family home. I forwarded the documents to a lawyer friend from Colombia named Priya at 1:42 a.m. Her reply came the next morning at 6:11. Do not sign this, she wrote. They're trying to separate themselves from downstream. Entire nights staring at distressed asset spreadsheets most people would close after 3 seconds. The Westport address appeared halfway down page 42 beside 3 red flags. Delinquency escalation, failed restructuring, and pending acceleration review. I remember leaning back in my chair at 2:18 a.m. while rain tapped against my apartment windows, and rereading the address 5 separate times to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Emma's family home. The place with the white stone staircase and Christmas dinners where her mother corrected the way I held wine glasses, was financially collapsing underneath them, while they still posted vacation photos from Aspen pretending nothing had changed. A week later, I attended an investor meeting at Alder Ridge's Midtown office, as the youngest person in the room by at least 12 years. Most of the men there barely acknowledged me at first. One actually asked if I was handling notes for someone. I let him think that for the first 30 minutes while I listened carefully to the portfolio discussion. Then I started asking questions about recovery projections tied to high-value Connecticut residential collateral. The room changed after that. Numbers have a way of forcing people to recalculate their assumptions. By the end of the meeting, one partner named Leonard Briggs pulled me aside near the elevators and asked where I'd learned debt analysis. Watching people underestimate risk, I told him. Technically true. Over the next 6 weeks, I quietly increased my position inside the acquisition group using profits from a transportation software licensing deal I'd finalized with a Chicago freight company in January. The same deal Emma once called cute but unstable. The licensing agreement alone was worth $640,000 over 18 months. I never told her because by then she only asked questions to measure status, not to understand me. Meanwhile, Emma's engagement announcements started appearing everywhere. Instagram photos. LinkedIn congratulations. A bridal shower invitation accidentally mailed to my old apartment because Emma still hadn't updated certain shared records after the breakup. Daniel looked exactly like the kind of man her parents would choose. Private equity, navy suits, family money polished into confidence. Every photo showed Emma smiling like she'd finally arrived at the correct version of adulthood. Then came the voice note. Vanessa again. Drunk again. You didn't get this from me, she whispered before forwarding an audio clip from Emma's engagement dinner in April. I sat on my kitchen floor listening to Emma laugh while telling 12 people I'd probably still be chasing startup fantasies at 40. Someone asked if I'd taken the breakup badly. Emma answered instantly. Honestly, she never had enough leverage to hurt me. I replayed that sentence 6 times. Not because it upset me, because it clarified everything. Leverage. That's how Emma understood relationships. Social leverage. Financial leverage. Emotional leverage. Whoever controlled perception controlled the room. And suddenly I understood exactly why revealing the truth privately would never matter. People like Emma only feel consequences publicly. 2 weeks before the engagement party, Richard attempted one final restructuring negotiation through Alder Ridge without realizing I was already part of the ownership chain reviewing the file. I sat silently on a Zoom call while his attorney argued for extension terms based on temporary liquidity strain. Temporary. The property had missed 7 payments. Property taxes were overdue. Secondary liens were surfacing weekly. Richard sounded older than I remembered. Tired. Desperate even. But then he said something that made my stomach turn cold. My daughter's engagement announcement should stabilize outside confidence. Outside confidence. He was using her marriage as financial optics. The call ended at 4:46 p.m. Leonard looked at me afterward and asked quietly, "You know these people personally, don't you?" I closed my laptop slowly. "I used to," I said. 3 days later, the final transfer authorization cleared. And for the first time in months, I finally accepted Emma's engagement invitation. The engagement party was held at the Ashbury Grand Hotel in Manhattan on May 14th, exactly 9 months after Emma first told her friends I was falling behind in life. I know the date because it was also the maturity deadline listed on the final foreclosure acceleration notice. Richard's attorneys failed to stop 3 days earlier. The ballroom looked like expensive denial wrapped in candlelight. White orchids, gold-rimmed champagne towers, a string quartet near the windows overlooking the river. Every detail designed to communicate stability to people trained to notice wealth instantly. I arrived 11 minutes after the toast began wearing a black silk dress I bought myself after closing the Chicago licensing deal, and for a few seconds nobody recognized me because humiliation changes the way people remember your face. Then Vanessa saw me first. Her expression shifted so fast I almost smiled. Emma turned next. Daniel followed. I watched the exact moment confusion became discomfort. Emma recovered quickly, of course. She always performed confidence well in public. "Wow," she said loudly enough for nearby guests to hear. "This is unexpected." I handed my coat to the attendant and thanked him calmly before answering. "Your invitation sounded sincere." A few people laughed nervously because they sensed tension without understanding it yet. Daniel approached with the polite caution of someone suddenly realizing he'd inherited unfinished emotional history. Up close he looked exhausted. There were faint shadows beneath his eyes, the kind people get from managing problems nobody talks about publicly. "Can I get you a drink?" he asked carefully. Before I could answer, Emma touched his arm possessively and smiled at me with practiced sympathy. "I heard things have been difficult lately," she said. Difficult. The word landed exactly the way she intended. Around us, conversations slowed almost imperceptibly. Wealthy social circles function like surveillance systems. Everyone pretends not to watch while memorizing every detail. I noticed Emma's college friend Chloe glance toward my shoes, probably checking whether they were designer. Old habits. "Actually," I said softly, "things have been productive." Emma gave a tiny smile that told me she thought I was bluffing. Then Richard appeared beside the champagne table holding a whiskey glass with slightly trembling fingers. The moment he saw me, the color drained from his face so visibly that Daniel noticed immediately. That was the first real crack in the evening. "Sophia," Richard said carefully, stepping closer. "I didn't realize you'd be attending. Not good to see you. Not how have you been. Just calculation." I suddenly knew he recognized the name attached to the acquisition paperwork. Maybe not fully, but enough. Emma looked between us, confused. "Dad?" she asked quietly. Richard ignored her completely. "Could we speak privately for a moment?" he asked me. There it was. Panic disguised as professionalism. I glanced around the ballroom deliberately before answering. I don't think private conversations have helped this situation much so far. Silence spread instantly after that sentence. Tiny. Sharp. Dangerous. Emma's smile finally weakened. "What situation?" she asked. Richard set his drink down too quickly, ice clinking against the glass. "Emma, not now." But she was already staring at me differently. People sense shifts in power before they understand them logically. Daniel looked genuinely confused now. "What's going on?" he asked. No one answered him. I reached into my handbag slowly and removed the cream-colored legal envelope I'd carried into the ballroom. The same one Emma recognized the moment I stepped inside. Her eyes locked onto the property address typed across the top right corner. Westport, Connecticut. Richard took one step toward me. "Sophia," he said quietly, almost pleading now. "This isn't the place." That sentence alone told everyone nearby something catastrophic was happening. Conversations had fully stopped around us. Even the quartet near the windows stumbled slightly before continuing. Emma looked at her father, then at me, then back at the envelope. "Why do you have our address?" she whispered. I opened the folder carefully and removed the finalized transfer documents. Thick paper. County seals. Recorded filing numbers. Months of silence compressed into 12 pages. "Because," I said calmly, As of Tuesday morning, your family home transferred under the Alder Ridge Recovery acquisition. Daniel frowned immediately. He understood finance terminology faster than Emma did. Richard closed his eyes. And Emma finally asked the question that changed the entire room. What does that mean? I looked directly at her. It means, I said softly, you spent months telling people I had no leverage while I was quietly becoming your lender. Nobody moved for several seconds after I said it. The room didn't explode into shouting like people imagine in revenge fantasies. Real humiliation is quieter than that. It spreads slowly across faces as people recalculate everything they thought they understood. Daniel looked at Emma first, not me, and that told me immediately their relationship had not been built on complete honesty either. Your family didn't tell me the property was under recovery review, he asked carefully, each word controlled so tightly it sounded rehearsed. Emma stared at her father in disbelief. Dad, she whispered again, but Richard couldn't even look at her now. He looked at the paperwork instead. Like staring long enough might somehow rearrange the outcome. I placed the documents gently on the cocktail table beside the centerpiece candles. Nobody touched them. They didn't need to. The county seals and transfer stamps were visible enough from where everyone stood. Vanessa covered her mouth with one hand. Chloe suddenly became very interested in her champagne glass. The same women who once laughed at screenshots of my unpaid invoices now looked terrified of making eye contact with me at all. Emma finally turned back toward me, and for the first time since I'd known her, she looked genuinely uncertain. You bought our house? She asked. The question sounded smaller than she intended. Not exactly, I replied calmly. Your family defaulted on obligations tied to the property. The debt transferred. I became part of the acquisition structure reviewing the recovery options. Daniel exhaled slowly and stepped away from Emma without realizing he'd done it. That tiny movement hurt her more than anything I could have said publicly. Recovery options? He repeated. Richard immediately interrupted. We were negotiating extensions. 7 missed payments isn't an extension problem, I answered quietly. It's a solvency problem. Several guests looked away instantly because financial collapse makes wealthy people deeply uncomfortable. Emma's mother appeared near the ballroom entrance looking pale enough to faint. Someone from hotel staff lowered the music volume without being asked. The entire evening had shifted from celebration into exposure. Emma folded her arms defensively. So what was this? She asked sharply. You came here to embarrass us? I almost laughed at the irony of that question. Instead, I reached into the folder again and removed a second document. The unsigned consulting liability transfer Richard's attorneys tried pressuring me into months earlier. No, I said softly. I came because your father tried attaching my company to this collapse while you told people I was failing. Emma grabbed the papers from my hand and scanned them rapidly. I watched the exact moment recognition hit her. Her signature sat on page 4 as witness. Authorization. Dated August 18th. I never read this, she whispered. You told me not to worry about it. Richard's silence answered for him. Daniel took the paperwork next. His entire posture changed while reading. Not angry. Calculating. Investors recognize liability exposure instinctively. You asked her to absorb reputational shielding risk? He asked Richard flatly. Nobody answered quickly enough. That was answer enough. Emma looked physically sick now. Sophia, she started, but stopped because there was no version of this conversation where she still occupied moral high ground. I noticed guests pretending to check phones while secretly listening to every word. Months earlier, those same people happily consumed stories about my supposed failure because humiliation is entertaining when it feels safe and distant. Now the room understood something different entirely. I hadn't disappeared after the breakup. I'd simply stopped announcing my progress to people who mistook silence for weakness. Richard finally spoke again, voice rough and exhausted. What do you want? There it was. The question everyone eventually asks once leverage changes hands. I looked around the ballroom one last time before answering. At the orchids. The photographers. The women who pitied me. The fiancé realizing he'd walked into a family crisis disguised as luxury. Then I looked directly at Emma. Nothing, I said calmly. The foreclosure process already exists whether I attend this party or not. I only came because for months you needed everyone to believe I was the one who lost everything. Nobody spoke after that. They didn't need to. The truth had already settled over the room completely. I picked up my coat from the attendant near the entrance and walked toward the elevators while absolute silence followed behind me. Just before the doors closed, I saw Daniel still holding the paperwork while Emma stood alone beside the engagement cake, finally understanding the difference between looking powerful and actually being protected. 3 months later, the engagement quietly disappeared from social media without explanation. No wedding photos. No honeymoon posts. Just silence. The Westport property entered structured liquidation under a private settlement agreement after multiple investors refused further extensions. And according to the county filings finalized on August 22, the home sold below its original valuation for the first time in almost 19 years. I never moved into it. I never wanted the house. That was the part people misunderstood online after the story started spreading through mutual circles. Revenge was never about taking their home. It was about surviving long enough to stop believing their version of me. Emma spent months teaching people to measure worth through appearances, titles, and curated success, while I quietly learned how fragile those things become once reality enters the room. The funny thing is, I still keep the cream-colored envelope inside my office desk drawer. Not as a trophy, just as proof that silence can build things humiliation never sees coming. And if you've ever stayed quiet while people underestimated you, subscribe. Because sometimes the strongest comeback isn't loud at all. Sometimes it simply arrives holding paperwork nobody expected you to understand.